Today's daf is Yevamos Amud Beis, and we have the Be'ezus Hashem in the beginning of a new Mesechta, a new Seder Noshin, Mesechtes Yevamos. Today's daf is being learned in honor of my son Dov Ber, my son Dovi's bar mitzvah. May he be zoicha to grow up and to continue to give his parents and his grandparents and the ganze mishpacha asach yiddish nachas. So Mesechtes Yevamos very much requires an introduction. So Be'ezus Hashem, just to introduce the basics of what exactly Yibum is, and as we go through the Masechta, we'll introduce the necessary sugyas and get into some of the lumpus. So Mesechtes Yevamos is a long, hard Mesechta, but it's based on 6 psukim in the Torah. The psukim are tucked away. They're in the end of Parshas Kiseitze. It says, Ki yeshvu achim yachdav, if there are going to be 2 brothers that were living together, umeis achad mehem, one of them died, he was married, uvein ein loy, and he left over no children. Says the Torah, although his wife is an almana, and typically an almana is allowed to marry anybody that she wants, in this case, loisia eshes hameis hachutza leishzar. This woman, this almana, is not allowed to just go marry any strange person. Rather, Yevama yavai aleh ulekacha loy leisha v'yibma. The brother that's alive, he has a mitzvah to do yibum. He has a mitzvah to marry this woman. Says the pasuk, Yakim al shem achiv ames v'lo yimachish shmoim b'Yisrael. The tachlis of the brother that's alive marrying this almana is for him to have a child through this almana, so that the brother that died, although he died without children, will have a hemshach, even though he himself will have not left any children, but through the yibum, he will have a hemshach. Says the pasuk, what happens if the yavam, if this brother that's alive says, I'm not interested, I understand there's a mitzvah, but it's not something I want to do. You can't force me to marry someone I don't want to marry. Says the pasuk, there's a plan B. The woman, the yavama, the amana, should go to Beis Din, the amra, and she should say, quote, Me'ein yavami lahakim la'achiv shem b'Yisrael lo'ava yadmi. My yavam has a mitzvah to marry me. He has a mitzvah to make sure that my late husband is going to have a hemshach, stating that this is not something he wants to do. The elders of the city, meaning the Sanhedrin, should call the yavam, the dibruel, they're going to talk to him, the amar, and if in fact the case is exactly like she said, that he doesn't want to do yibum, he should say it. The next thing that happens is that the yavam then comes in front of the yavam, and it's all done in the presence of the bezin. She does something very interesting. She takes his shoe off, the yarka b'fanav, then she spits in front of him. The ansa, she declares va'amra, and she says, "Kacha yeyasa lo'ish asher lo yivneh beis achad." This is what's meant to be done to a person who refused to take the opportunity and to perpetuate the memory of his late brother. The nikra shmoi b'Yisrael, and then he is going to be called a beis chalutza, now a house of somebody that did chalitza. So these 6 psukim in the Torah are the Torah shebiksav of what we know as Mesechtes Yevamos. So again, in short, it's a very easy summary. There were 2 brothers. One of them was married. He died. He left over no children. The Torah says the brother that's alive has a mitzvah saseh da'iraisa to do yibum, which means he has a mitzvah to go and to marry the eshes hameis, to marry the almana. What happens if he doesn't want to do it? We don't force him to. There is a plan B, and that is chalitza. It's supposed to happen in the presence of Beis Din. He has to be wearing the shoe. She removes the shoe from his foot. She spits in front of him. She declares a little bit of a Megillah vibe. Kacha yeyasa lo'ish asher lo yivneh beis achiv, the mitzvah of chalitza. It's interesting that the mitzvah of Yibum, although it's, of course, one of the Taryag mitzvahs, it's a mitzvah in the Torah, but it's something that we find already in the Torah before Matan Torah. In Parshas Vayeshev, so Yehuda had 3 sons. The pasuk said he had a son, Er, he had a son, Oinon, and he had a son, Shelah. Now, Yehuda's oldest son, Er, got married to Tamar. Yehuda died, Er died, and left over no children. And because he left over no children, so Yehuda went to his son, Oinon, and said, Boy el eshes achicha, go marry Tamar, meaning marry your brother's amana, v'yabe moisa. The Torah actually uses the word yibum. V'hakim zer lachicha. So like this, there's going to be a little bit of a hemshach. The pasuk says that Oinam, for whatever reason, refused to be mekayim the mitzvah of yibum. The next son that Yehuda had, Shelah, was a little child at the time. So Tamar had lost her husband, Oinan refused to do Yibum. Shelah was too young, so Tamar ends up going home. Time passes, and Tamar realized that here she's technically a woman that is subject to Yibum. Her husband had died, left over no children. She's what we know as a Yevamos, and nobody wanted to do Yibum. So she came up with an idea. Her idea was that she was going to pose as a Zaina. She was going to somehow get Yehuda, her father-in-law, to be mezana with her, engage in bia. In Yehuda's mind, it was going to be a bias nos. In her mind, it was going to be an act of yibum, the kachava, and the rest is history. But it's mevur in the Torah that there was a yibum that took place. This yibum took place before Matan Torah. It took place between Yehuda and Tamar. That's a father-in-law and a daughter-in-law. The Ramban, in his Pirush al Torah, on that pasuk in Parshas Vayeshev, says that you see that even though the Torah hadn't been given at that time, still there was an idea people were observing Yibum. And must be that the Kadmoinim, the people understood that there must be some tachlis, some tayelis in doing Yibum. Meaning, Pashat, we think of Yibum as a mitzvah in the Torah. Just like tefillin is a mitzvah in the Torah, sitting in a sukkah is a mitzvah in the Torah, doing the mitzvah of Yibum is a mitzvah in the Torah. But the Ramban says that from the fact that you find that this was something that was being observed even in Matan Torah, must be that there was something that people understood, that there was some side, there was some tayelis, some tachlis from doing Yibum. So says the Ramban, quote, Avalo Indian. Soid gadol misoidas haTorah b'toledas ha'adam. He says the truth is there is a side, and if somebody would understand the effect that one has through doing yibum, he would realize that it's from the soidas haTorah b'toledas ha'adam. V'nikaru le'inei raya. It's something that's obvious to people that are able to see. Asher nasalam Hashem einayim liros v'oznayim l'shmoya v'hoyu ha'chachamim ha'kadmoinim koydem ha'Torah yoidim ki yesh tayelos kedai l'bim. And the kadmoinim, they were people that actually understood this. Now, what exactly the side is, the Ramban doesn't say. So you can go through from the beginning to the end. The Ramban's not going to be megala what the side is. But all the Mefarshim on the Ramban say that although the Ramban here didn't express what the side is, but the Ramban in his Pirush on Iyov talks a little bit about the side of Iyov, the side of Yibum. And over there, the Ramban says it's related to Gilgul Neshamas. That's what it's related to. So this man died. He left over no children. He doesn't have a hemshach. If his brother would go and marry the Yevama and have a child, the thought would be that that child is a Gilgul of the deceased brother. And there's a soy gadol in this. And that's something that the Kadmoinim understood. They were privy to the concept of Gilgulin. They knew this even Koydem Matan Torah. And that's why Yehuda's already telling his son to go ahead and do Yibum. And this is why Tamar wants Yibum, because there's an understanding that Yibum is something that has a Toyeles simply because of the fact that it allows the neshama of the deceased to be reincarnate, to come back to this world. Now, one of the things you see from the Yibum of Yehuda and Tamar is that Yibum doesn't necessarily have to be with a brother marrying his brother's wife. Because the Yibum that took place with Yehuda and Tamar was with a father-in-law and a daughter-in-law. And the Ramban says that the emes is, that's the way it is. As far as the soy gadol misoidas haTorah b'toledas ha'adam of Yibum is, it's not exclusive dafka to two brothers. It's not exclusive to a brother and his brother's wife. But really, with all kroivim, one would be able to be mekayim this inyan of Gilgul. So he says, if that's the case, so why is it that in the Torah it's kiyesh v'achim yachdav? How come the only Yibum you find is together with brothers? So says the Ramban, the reason is because really for somebody to marry one of his relatives is a problem. Were it not for the mitzvah of Yibum, then he'd violate one of the Isurei Arayas. No, the Torah was matter, as we're going to see soon in the introduction, the Isser of marrying your brother's wife, the Isser Shesach, for a Tayelas. But the Torah didn't want to be matter all the Arayas. So what the Torah did was, it was only matter one. Which one? Eshesach, brother's wife. Why brother's wife? So the Ramban says, because that's the one that was always the most shchiach, and that's the one that's able to accomplish the greatest tayelis. This is way above our pay grade. But that's what the Ramban says. That really, if you understand the concept, the soid of what Yibum is, it's not exclusive to kiyesh ya'achim yachdav. But really, anytime a man dies without children, if one of the relatives would go and be miyabim this amana on some level, that person would be able to fulfill what the tachlis of Yibum is. It's more manifest with regards to two brothers and the brother marrying the brother's wife. And it's for that reason, that's ultimately the way the Torah presented it. But says the Ramban, something very interesting. He says that being that the toyeles of Yibum is not exclusive to a brother and his brother's wife, but rather it's something that could be accomplished with all Kroivim, it would make sense then that if a man dies, leaves over no children, and for whatever reason, it's not shaykh for there to be a brother to do Yibum, maybe he didn't have a brother, then at the very least, another relative should come in that person's place and should do the proverbial Yibum. Now, it's not going to be Yibum, because at the end of the day, the way the Torah presented the mitzvah of Yibum is with an Eshasach, and it's Ki Yesh Lachem Yachtav. But once you understand the time of the crow, once you understand the Toyelos of what Yibum is, so even though you can't fulfill the mitzvah's Yibum in the proper way, but on some level you can, and that is something that would be appropriate, and that's something that would be encouraged. Now, it would have to be a situation where the Miyabim, who's marrying his relative, is not violating one of the Yisuri Arayas. But as long as it's possible to do in a way where you're not violating any of the Yisuri Arayas, it's something that would be very, very much encouraged to do. And then the Ramban says, in fact, there's a precedent for this. There is one place in Tanakh where you find that there were relatives that actually did something that wasn't Yibum, but it resembled Yibum, and it's for this reason. And that is Boyaz and Rus. We know that Rus, her husband died during a hunger, there were no children, and technically Rus was looking for a relative to come and to marry her. There was no brother to go ahead and do Yibum. Rus, who was Boyaz, who was a distant relative, he was also the Gadol Adar, he was the Shofet, he went and he married Rus. Now, if you go through the Psukim in Rus, the Pasuk describes the marriage between Boyaz and Rus, not as Yibum, but rather it describes it as Geula. And the Ramban says that that word Geula is a word that's used in the event that there's the Toyelis of Yibum that's happening, but it's not a real Yibum. Meaning when it's a real Yibum, it's Ki Yesh Yachim Yachtav. So in that case, we know it as Yibum. Where it's not Yibum, but there is a relative who's allowed to marry this almana that's going to marry her. That's not what we would know as Yibum, but what it would be known as Geula. Bottom line is we have two places in the Torah Shabbat where you find that there was some form of Yibum. We have Yehuda and Tamar. We have Boyaz and Rus. Ironically and interestingly, both of them were not your classic Yibum. Yehuda and Tamar was a father-in-law and a daughter-in-law, which Kedem not in Torah was okay, but that's the form of the Yibum that it was. As far as Boyaz and Rus, it's not even what we would refer as Yibum, but it's what the Ramban says is known in Tanakh and in the Torah Shabbat Peh as Geula. So what exactly is Yibum? What is the mitzvah of Yibum? So it's a pasuk in the Torah. It's pretty straightforward. It says in the Torah, Yevamos yavoy aleha ulekacha loy leisha v'yibma. There's a mitzvah for the Yavam, that's the brother that's alive, to marry the Yavam. That's the Almana. Meaning there's a mitzvah to go ahead and to create an ishus so that the Yavam and the Yavama, they're going to be the new couple. They're the ones that are going to build now Bayis Nema B'Yisrael. They're the ones that are going to be married. Now, it's important to know, and every single item of the introduction is really critical because it's something that's going to chazir itself over again and again and again. That is, we're familiar with the basic concept of Ishus. The man wants to get married to Das Moshe B'Yisrael. So what does he do? So the first Mishna Meseches Kedushin, Ha'isha niknes b'shalosh drachim b'kesef shtar ubiyah. So either kesef, or shava kesef, shtar, or with a biyah. If somebody goes to a woman with Eidim and says, Harei mikudeshes li b'kesef shtar ubiyah, the halacha is they're now mikudeshes. What does it mean mikudeshes? They're married, but they're not married 100%. They're in what's known as a state of kedushin or what's known as a state of eris. In order for the marriage to be completed 100%, they have to do something else. They have to do what's known as nesuin. How do you do nesuin? The short answer is chuppah, right? Different minhadim, which is yichud room, etc. But the bottom line is that marriage happens in two stages. It happens in two shlavim. The first shlav is kedushin / erisin. Those are synonyms of the same thing. The second shlav is nesuin. As far as kedushin goes, there's three options. It can be done by kesef, it can be done by shtar, it can be done by biyah. As far as nesuin goes, that's what we know as chuppah. Yibum is also an ishus. The end result of yibum is going to get this couple to where a couple is after they have kedushin and nesuin. But there's one way to do yibum, biyah. And that one ma'aseh biyah creates everything. It's the kedushin, it's the nesuin, it's the only way for this ishus to take place. And when that ma'aseh biyah takes place, it creates the maximum amount of ishus. There's nothing else that needs to be done afterwards. So that's a tremendous anomaly in the world of creating ishus that you find in Yibum, that you don't find in a traditional Kedushin, because over here, the only way for a person to be Mekayim and the mitzvah of Yibum, and the only way for a person to go ahead and create this ishus is through a Maisa Bia. The truth is, the Lamdim Claire, and this is something we'll get to, what is the mitzvah of Yibum? Is the mitzvah the Maisa Bia, or is the mitzvah creating the ishus? Meaning, is the mitzvah the Maisa Bia grada, you date a Maisa Bia, so cooked on ishus? Or is the mitzvah the ishus grada, the way you're creating the ishus is through a Maisa Bia? But at the end of the day, they're inextricable. It's one way to create this ishus. The mitzvah of Bia, of Yibum is a mitzvah's Bia. It's mefurish in the Torah. Yevamos yavay aleh ulekachalei leisha v'yibum. Which means, just to put this b'mil machem, because it's so important. What would be if the Yavam goes over to the Yevama, he gives her a diamond ring and says, nothing. Gunished. Nothing would happen. Because the Yibum needs to happen through Bia, and if it's going to be done through a regular, ordinary Maisa Kedushin, it's going to have absolutely no kayach to be able to pile anything. Stating that, the Rabbanan came along, and the Rabbanan said that it's not appropriate for a Yavam and a Yevama that literally the first time that they're engaging in any form of relationship, it should be Yevama Yavay Aleh Ulekachalei Leisha V'Yibum. So the Rabbanan said that we're going to be masakin, that the way the ishus of Yibum should play out is the same exact way that our ordinary ishus plays out. And that is that before the Yavam is Mekayim, his mitzvah dairaisa of Yevama Yavay Aleh Ulekachalei Leisha V'Yibum, first he should be Mekadesh, this woman, as if he was being Mekadesh any Isha Penuya, meaning other bekesef, other b'shtar. So midairaisa, it's meaningless. However, the Rabbanan felt that that's more appropriate, and the Rabbanan said that before the Yibum there should be hareya mikudeshas libetabazu gedas Moshe v'Yisrael, other bekesef, other b'shtar. If when the Yavam does that, meaning he gives the Yavam a kesef or he gives the Yavam a shtar, it's what's known as a maimer. Maimer is a ma'aseh kedushin that's done between Yavam and Yavam. Maimer is nothing midairaisa, but Maimer is very, very much midrabanan. But the point is that it's only midrabanan that there's something called Maimer, because really on a dairaisa level, the only way to create the ishus is through bia, and it's really the only thing that's necessary, because once the bia takes place, at that point, anything else is going to be superfluous, because the ganze ishus is going to take place through the bia. Now, the Iker parasha of Yibum is a parasha of mitzvah sasek. Yevama Yavay Aleh Ulekachalei Leisha V'Yibum. It's one of the Taryag mitzvahs. It's a mitzvah saseh. But there's also a loy saseh in the parasha of Yibum, and that is, it says in the Torah again, so one of the brothers dies, he left over no children. It says the Torah Olav, this almana, although she's an almana, and usually an almana is a woman that's allowed to marry anybody that she wants, but this almana is not allowed to. She's not allowed to just go ahead and marry anybody that she wants. What's the pshat? What's the reason that this almana is not allowed to marry anyone that she wants? So pashat the pshat is because the Yavam has a mitzvah, and if she's going to go marry somebody else, she's going to accept a kedushin, so she's going to be infringing on the ability of the Yavam to be Mekayim his mitzvah, and that's not something that's okay. If the Yavam has a mitzvah, so she at the very least has to make herself available, so like this, he'll be able to do the mitzvah that's incumbent upon him to do. But the truth is, the Isra Loisiya Ishes Ames Achutza Lishzar is a little bit deeper than that, and it goes to the gut, it goes to the core, again, of understanding Pashit Yevamos 101. That is, we're all familiar with the term Zika. Zika is synonymous with Yevamos. So what exactly is Zika? Zika is a bond. In the context of Yevamos, it's a Ishus Diga bond. And it's mavur in all the sugyas that when there are two brothers, one of them dies and he leaves over no children. The almana is on some level bound to the Yavam. Meaning, before the Yavam ever did Bia, before he even did Maimer Midrabanan, the etzem fact that there's a mitzvah of Yevama Yavay Aleh, that creates a zika. It creates a bond, it creates an energy, it creates a connection, it creates some diluted form of ishus that's going to exist between the Yavam and the Yevamos. The truth is that one of the big sugis in Meseches Yevamos is the sugi of Zika. And when you learn the sugi of Zika, so we'll see, it's a machlokes, yesh Zika or ain't Zika. And there were those that held yesh Zika, there were those that held that ain't Zika. But it's very, very misleading. Because it sounds like there's actually a machlokes whether there's Zika or not. There's no machlokes whether there's Zika. Even the mandama that holds ain't Zika holds there's Zika. What's the shaila yesh Zika, ain't Zika? The shaila is qualitatively in echos. How far are we supposed to take this Zika? How much are we supposed to view it and reckon with it as an ishus in terms of starting to apply all the different halachas related to ishus? But you want to know if there's Zika? There's Zika. There's an energy, there's some sort of bond, there's an ishus that exists between the Yavam and the Yevamos just by virtue of the fact that just by that in of itself, that misa creates a Zika. It's because of that Zika that it says in the Torah, the reason this woman is not allowed to get married is because she's married. Now, she's not mamish married, but on some level, she's married. There's a Zika. And because there's a Zika, she's zakuk to the Yavam, so she doesn't have a garach. She doesn't have a bailus to just go ahead and decide that, yes, she just wants to marry somebody. Because on some level, she's bound to the Yavam. So the idea of Zika is very, very integral to understanding Yevamos. And literally, the first pasuk, this is something that's very much predicated on the concept of Zika. So what happens if the Yavam says, I don't want to do Yibum? So it's not a good thing. It's mashma from the psukim in the Torah that we embarrass him and we do it publicly. And they used to refer to him as a beis chalutz anal. So without knowing exactly what this all means, it certainly seems to read it in a very, very derogatory way. Meaning it's mashma that really he was supposed to do Yibum. He chose not to do Yibum. And because he chose not to do Yibum, so the next thing that we say is, okay, you didn't do Yibum, you should do Chalitza. In fact, the Ramban's Lashon in Parshas Vayeshev is, quote, V'hinei nechshav la'achzorius gedoylo ba'ach kasher lo'yachpeitz li'yavim. The Ramban, when he talks about understanding the side of what Yibum is, he says if there's a brother that doesn't want to do Yibum, nechshav la'achzorius gedoylo. It's an incredible achzoria, says the Ramban. The person that doesn't want to do Yibum. But the point is that Chalitza is the next thing that's meant to be done. Now we're going to get into all the sugyas of Chalitza. But one thing is interesting, and that is, it's mavur that once a woman is a chalutza, we look at her a little bit like a grusha. So, for example, a kohen is not allowed to marry a grusha, midairaisa. A kohen, midrabanan, is not allowed to marry a chalutza. And the reason is because we look at a chalutza a little bit as if she would be a grusha. What shaykhis? What does the chalutza have to do with a grusha? The teretz is zika. The teretz is because chalitza isn't just next best mitzvah to do in the event that the Yavam decides he doesn't want to do Yibum. You have a mitzvah to do Yibum. You decide you don't want to do Yibum, so instead do Chalitza. It's much more than that. You have to do something. Right now there's a zika, there's a bond, there's some sort of issues between the Yavam and the Yevamos. So either they go and they consummate it, and the way they consummate it is Yevama Yomi. That's going to be the completion that is going to complete the issues, or they sever it. They sever it by doing chalitza. But when we understand the idea of zika, then we appreciate what chalitza is doing. Chalitza is severing an issue. So it's severing an issue. So on some level, it's a ma'aseh gerushin. If it's a ma'aseh gerushin, okay, it's not midayraisa, it's only midrabanan. But kol the tikkun rabbanan came dayraisa tikkun, and just like midayraisa, kohen's not allowed to marry a gush. We can easily understand why it would be that a kohen would not be able to marry a chalutza either. So again, we have the psukim. We went through a little bit of the soy gadol misoy the satira b'tayledes ha'adam, that Yevamos ties into Gilgulim somehow. What exactly the mitzvah of Yibum is? Yevama Yavay Aleh. That's what it is. Is the mitzvah the biyah, is the mitzvah the ishus, but at the end of the day, you're going to create an ishus, and there's one way to create the ishus, is through a biyah. Talked a little bit about Maimer, discussed the concept of Zika, and how that brings to life, number one, the loisa say of loisia ishus ames achutza lichzar, and also the concept of what exactly chalitza is. But we can't start the first Mishna without understanding one more point very, very clearly, because this, more than anything else, is going to underpin all the sugyas we're going to learn. And that is that really Yibum is a tremendous chiddush. And the reason it's a tremendous chiddush is because were it not for the mitzvah of Yibum, it would be aser midai raisa b'chayde krisos shigegosay chatas, for a person to marry his brother's wife. So we know that there's a parsha of Arayis. It's mentioned in the Torah twice in Parshas Achrimos and Parshas Kedoshim, where a man is not allowed to marry a relative. Now, what exactly is the definition of a relative? So the Torah gives a whole bunch of different examples of what relatives are. Some relatives are considered Arayis, some relatives are not considered Arayis. Definitely one of the sub things of Meseches Yevamos. But the point is that ordinarily a person is not allowed to marry an erva. An Eishes Ach is an erva, meaning if there's two brothers and one of them is married, so the halacha is that this brother is not allowed to marry his brother's wife. Now, just to be clear, when she's married to his brother, obviously you can't marry her. She's an Eishes Ish. A person can't marry anybody that's married. The chiddush is that even if his brother dies, or if his brother divorces his wife, once she's an Eishes Ach, she's always going to be an Eishes Ach. She's going to be an Eishes Ach forever, and this brother will not be allowed to marry her. If he marries her, the kedusha won't be chal. If they have a child together, the child will be a mamzer. It has all the hidurim, Rachmana litzlan, of a bad marriage. A man is not allowed to marry an Eishes Ach. Stating that when it comes to Yibum, not only is it not usher for the brother to marry her, now all of a sudden there's going to be a mitzvah esed raisa. But here's the point. The point is that every time we analyze a Yibum situation, we need to make sure there really is a mitzvah Yibum. Because if there's no mitzvah Yibum, that means there's no heter for this man to marry this woman. You say she's an almana. Yeah, but she's an Eishes Ach, she's an erva. He's not allowed to marry an erva. So we need to really be certain. We have to be 100% positive that there's a mitzvah yibum. Because the rega, there's no mitzvah yibum. Now we go literally from sea to shining sea. It goes min akotza la kotza. Either it's a mitzvah esed raisa, that's from the soidas hagdoilim, b'toiledes adam, or fakir, it's the worst thing in the world a person can do. It's a chayve krisus, ariri, and all the things that it says in the Torah about all these different arayas that are very, very chomer. So really, when we talk about arayas and when we talk about yibum, being that we're setting up the case with an erva, that's really what every single Yevama is. So in the event there's a mitzvah yibum, so there's a mitzvah yibum. But in the event that there's no mitzvah yibum, then to the contrary, then we're going to be left with an Isser Eishes Ach. So Yevamas is every single case is very, very delicate because really we have to make sure that there's going to be a Heter Eishes Ach. Because if there's no Heter Eishes Ach, then to the contrary, what we're going to end up with is we're going to end up with an Isser Eishes Ach. It's just interesting to note that Bizman Hazeh Yevamas is still negay, right? Of course, Yibum is still negay Bizman Hazeh. Stating that the Meseches Yevamos that we're going to learn is very much not no gay of Bizman Hazeh, and it's for two reasons. The first reason is the Gemara Meseches Yevamos Taflamet Tes Amud Beis. The Gemara says mitzvahs yibum kodemes l'mitzvahs chalitza. That the mitzvah of yibum is kodemes l'mitzvahs chalitza, meaning every yavam he has a choice. He could do yibum or chalitza. L'chatchila he's supposed to do yibum. But Rishon is of the Mishna, Shahayim Eschavim L'Shem Mitzvah. That was really in the olden times, where people had proper kavanas when they did a mitzvah. But Achshav Shahayim Eschavim L'Shem Mitzvah. But now that people don't have proper kavanah when they do a mitzvah, Amru, then Chazal said, Mitzvahs Chalitza Kedemas L'Mitzvahs Yibum. Now it's better not to do Yibum, it's better to do Chalitza. Meaning, once upon a time, where people had right machshavas, they had the right kavanas when they did Yibum, so then we said do Yibum. But now that people don't have the right kavanas, now the Katchila, we encourage people to do Chalitza. What does Yibum have to do with the right kavanas? So the Gemara continues, and the Gemara brings a brayso. Abishal said, "Hakoynes es yivimtoi." If someone is going to be ba in a Yevama, l'shem noi, l'shem ishus, u'l'shum davar ach, not l'shum mitzvah, he's going to do it for some ulterior reason. Ki'ilu pogea be'erva. It's as if he was born in erva. V'korev ani be'einai liyos havlad mamzer. And it's even korev, I can't say it for sure. But these are Abishal's famous words in Yevamis. It's korev ani be'einai liyos havlad mamzer. That it's korev to me to say that if a child would be born, the child would be mamzer. And everybody muches to explain, and that's Hashem. When we get there, we'll talk a lot about Abishal. There's a lot of geschmack there. But the point is, Abishal was megala to us that if somebody would do Yibum and he wouldn't have the right kavanah, it could be it's a problem. Why? Because like we said, really every Yevama is an Eshesach. Every Yevama is an Erva. Norvas, the mitzvah is the reason it's okay. But if there's a pgam in the mitzvah, or there's a chisaron in shleimus of how the mitzvah is being done, that in of itself could be a seed, but that could be a reason for it to somehow mess up the whole beer. And if it messes it up, that's a big problem. Why? Because now we're dealing already with an Isra Shesach. And it's for that reason the Ramah brings in Shulchan Aruch. It's in Hilchas Yibum v'Chalitza. It's in Even Ezer. We shift gears from Erechaim to Even Ezer. It's in Even Ezer. It's in Siman Kuv Samachei. He says that the minig is in all the Medinas Ashkenaz, based on a Gemara and Yevamos and Amud Beis that nobody does even today. Today, all people do is chalitza. Now, the Ramos says it. Shulchan Aruch didn't say it. The Mechaber didn't say it. And the meaning by the Sfardim has been, and I believe to a degree continues to be, that if the Yavam and the Yevama want to do Yibum, they can do Yibum. So in the Ashkenazi world, Yibum is something that hasn't been done already for centuries. In the Sephardi world, it is something that's been done, and there's some contemporary truvas that we're going to get to. But the bottom line is, the first reason that unsere Yevamis that we're about to learn is not negeya, even le'aleinu, if there ever is such a situation, is because the ikar of Meseches Yevamis deals with Yibum. And today we don't do Yibum. But there's another reason that the Yevamis we're about to learn is not so negeya. This is even more intuitive. And that is because all the complicated and all the intricate cases that we're going to learn about today, and a lot more to come, deals with marriages that involved more than one wife. And since Rabbeinu Gershon Ma'ir HaGoyla made a takana that a man is not allowed to marry more than one wife, really most of Yevamos became not Negei Halacha L'Maisa anymore, because there's no tzaris, and there's no tzaris, and there's no tzaris erves, and there's no tzaris and there's no tzaris sait, there's no tzaris machzeh Yerusha. So Rabbeinu Gershon, with his grace takana of Cherem de Rabbeinu Gershon, altered the landscape of Jewish history. One of the ways is that so much of the cases that we learn about in Meseches Yevamos are poshim, not negeya. But either way, so Yevamos is loyalenu negeya. But today, if there's ever a situation, the times, it's going to end up being chalitza. But all the intricacies of everything that we're going to learn is not negeya, ironically, for different reasons. Not because there's no Beis HaMikdash, not because it's pashut, because of the takana of Rabbeinu Gershon, and because of Abba Shol's memra, who said that I believe if somebody would do Yibum, and he wouldn't do it with the proper kavanas, the karv, the einai, v'yois havlad mams. Either way, this is the hakdama, the very, very, very short hakdama, the first of the very short hakdamas to Meseches Yevamos. But we can't start the Mishnah yet. We first have to introduce the Mishnah. Much, much shorter hakdama. So the first Mishnah of Meseches Yevamos, and the whole first daf, by the way, is a Mishnah. So it's a short daf, long hakdama. So the first Mishnah of Meseches Yevamos is going to deal with the halacha of an erva that falls liyibum, of a tsaras erva that falls liyibum, and of a tsaras erva that falls liyibum. So we're diving in. That's the first Mishnah. So, not every time that a Yevama falls the Yibum is there a mitzvah to do Yibum. Meaning, as we're going to see, there are many, many exceptions to the rule. The pasuk seems to be very straightforward. Ki yeshvu achim yachtav, umeis achad mehem, uvein einloi, l'si yeshes ameis achutza l'shzar, Yevama yava yava, l'tochel l'lisha, v'yedma. Sounds like, I don't know, two brothers, one of them died, left over no children. That's what Yibum is. This mitzvah to do Yibum. But as we're going to learn throughout the Masechta, it's not so pashut. And there are many situations, many scenarios, many marriages, many different things that would cause us to say that there's not going to be a mitzvah of Yibum. The primary, the avi voice, the rosh shebechabura, as it relates to examples of when you have ki yesh v'achim yachtav umeis achad mehem uvein ein loy, yet you do not have a mitzvah of Yevama Yava Yaleva Yidma, is when the brother's wife, meaning the brother that died's wife, the Yevama, is an erva to the Yavam. So if there's an erva relationship between the Yavam and the Yevama, in that case, there's not going to be a mitzvah of Yibum. Not only is there not going to be a mitzvah of Yibum, but as we're going to see, there's also not going to be a mitzvah of chalitza, which, by the way, at first glance makes a lot of sense. Just from being Mavas Edra, the parsha of Yibum, just from reading the 6 psukim, it seems pretty clear that what is chalitza? The man didn't want to do Yibum. Oh, you don't want to do Yibum? Do chalitza. Kacha yeyasa loish, right? Now you're supposed to go ahead, and now you're supposed to do chalitza. Well, if he didn't have a mitzvah to do Yibum, if he couldn't do Yibum, why should there be chalitza? And the truth is, Chazal say, kol which again seems very intuitive. Yet we're going to see at the end of today's daf already the first case where there's an idea of chayletzes where there's no yibum, but there is a mitzvah to do chalitza. But the bottom line is an erva that falls the yibum, there's no yibum and there's also no chalitza. Now, just to clarify what this means, you're going to say, what do you mean? An erva that falls the yibum, there's no yibum? Didn't we just say that every single yavam is the chanerva? Every yavama that falls the yibum is an erva. Every Yevama is an Eshesach. So if every Yevama is an Eshesach, and yet there's a mitzvah of Yibum, so what do you mean she's an Erva? Of course she's an Erva. Every Yevama is an Erva. Oh, there's an additional Erva? Why does that matter? The teretz is, the Erva of Eshesach, the Torah was matter. Because that's something that's implied in every single Yevamas. Every single Yibum setup is this brothers. One of the brothers dies, leaves over an almana, no children. By definition, she's an Eshes Ach to the Yavam, and it says in the Torah, Yevamo Yavam Yaleh. So the erva of Eshes Ach is something that the Torah was matter. But if there's any additional erva, whatever it is, for example, the brother that died was married to the brother that's alive's daughter. So it comes out that she's an erva to him. So any situation where there might be an erva, the halacha is there's not going to be a mitzvah of yibum. There's also not going to be a mitzvah of chalitza. That's the halacha of an erva that falls the yibum. What's a tzaras erva? What happens if the brother that dies left over not one wife, left over two wives? Both wives did not have any children, but he left over two wives. One was an erva to the brother that's alive, and the other wife was not an erva. The halacha is that being that the Yavam doesn't have a mitzvah to do yibum with the erva, so too he doesn't have a mitzvah to do yibum with the tzaras erva. Just like there's a halacha that there's no yibum, there's no chalitza with an erva, so too there's a halacha that there's no yibum, there's no chalitza with a tzaras erva. What's the halacha of a tzaras tzara? So for a tzaras tzara, we already have to come on to a third brother. So let's give these brothers names. Ruvain died. He left over a almana and left over no children. He actually left over two almanas. One of them was Shimon's relative, Shimon's erva, and the other one was not an erva to Shimon. So the halacha is, ordinarily there would be yibum. However, in this case, there's not going to be yibum. Why is there going to be no yibum in this case? There's no yibum and there's no chalitza with an erva. The other wife is going to be a tzaras erva. So there's no yibum, there's no chalitza with the erva. There's no yibum, there's no chalitza with the tzaras erva. As a result, there's no mitzvahs yibum, there's no mitzvahs chalitza. What happens if when Ruvain died, he left over two brothers, not just Shimon, but he left over Levi as well. Now, the wives of Ruvain were not an erva or a tzaras erva to Levi. Ruvain was married to Shimon's erva, but Ruvain was not married to Levi's erva. So when Ruvain died, Shimon couldn't do yibum, Shimon couldn't do chalitza, not with the erva, not with the tzaras erva, but Levi was able to. Levi had no problem going and doing yibum chalitza. So Levi went ahead and Levi did yibum. And Levi did yibum with the tzaras erva. He didn't do it with the woman that was the erva. He did the yibum with the tzaras erva. Okay, so Levi's happily married now to the tzaras erva. Just so happens Levi has another wife. Levi hasn't had any children yet, and then Levi dies. So that Levi's two wives, the original tzaras erva, jumping in, and his other wife, both fall the yibum to Shimon. The tzaras erva is falling the yibum to Shimon since Sveitim. She fell to yibum the first time when Ruvain died, and now she's fallen to yibum the second time when Levi died. There's another tzara as well. So what's the halacha? Does Shimon do yibum? Does Shimon not do yibum? Shimon can't do yibum with the original tzaras erva because she was already the tzaras erva the first time she fell a yibum. She remains the tzaras erva the second time as well. Why that's the case? The short answer is Nesra. The long answer is we're going to get to it. But the bottom line is, so Shimon can't do yibum with the original tzaras erva. Okay, he also can't do yibum with the other woman. Why? Because she's the tzara of the tzaras erva. So we know what an erva is. We know what the tzaras erva is, and now we know what the tzaras tzara is. Now, just to clarify one thing, again, our Mishnah, it's just the Mishna, it's the whole down. But the Mishnah is going to talk about a situation where there were two brothers. One of them is married to the other brother's erva, and then he dies. So the halach is that even though he died without children, and ordinarily there would be a mitzvah yibum, there's no yibum on an erva. Not only is there no yibum on an erva, there's also no yibum on a tzaras erva. And if you add layers to the case, there'd be no yibum with the tzaras tzara, etc., etc., etc. But just to clarify, how is it possible that Ruvain was married to Shimon's erva? If Ruvain and Shimon are brothers, does that not by definition mean that if someone is an erva to Shimon, that means it would be an erva to Ruvain as well? And in which case, Ruvain should have had no ability to be able to marry this woman? Again, Ruvain and Shimon are brothers. That's the case. Ruvain's married to a woman that's Shimon's relative. That's Shimon's erva. So how is it possible that Ruvain's married to Shimon's erva? So it's a toss, right? For two reasons. Number one, I don't know, maybe Ruvain was married to Shimon's wife's sister. Shimon's wife's sister is an erva to Shimon. It's a chos ishtoi, but she's not an erva to Ruvain. So there are many, many hypothetical cases of arayas where A woman could be an erva to one brother and not be an erva to another brother. Right? It's posh. Doesn't need to be stated, but just for the sake of clarity, I think it's worth to say. But there's another case, and this does need to be said, and that is that when we talk about brothers in the context of Yibum, brothers mean two men that share the same father. Yevamos doesn't care if they have the same mother or not. It's irrelevant. The only thing Yevamos cares about is if they have the same father. So if they're achim in ha'av, they're considered achim. If they're not achim in ha'aim, or if they're only achim in ha'aim, they're not going to be considered brothers. So it's very, very possible to have two brothers that share the same father, but they don't share the same mother. So it's theoretically possible that Reuven would be married to Shimon's sister. What do you mean? If Reuven's married to Shimon's sister, and Reuven and Shimon are brothers, then by definition, doesn't that mean Reuven's married to his own sister? No, because Reuven's married to Shimon's maternal sister. Yeah, Reuven and Shimon, they're only paternal brothers. Either way, with that introduction, we begin the first Mishna, Meseches Yevamos. Some daily Mishna, Chamesh Esrei Noshim. There are 15 women, 15 examples of arayas that poitros tzaros seim, v'tzaros tzaros seim, min achalitza or min ayibum. There are 15 examples of arayas where if this erva fell a yibum, there'd be no mitzvahs yibum, there'd be no mitzvahs chalitza. Not only would there be no yibum, no chalitza with the erva, but there'd also be no yibum and no chalitza with the tzaras erva. And not only would there be no yibum and no chalitza with the tzaras erva, but like we spoke at in the introduction, there would also be no yibum and no chalitza with the tzara of the tzaras erva. The following are the list of the 15 arayas for which this aforementioned statement is true. Peter. So again, two brothers, Reuven, Shimon. Reuven dies. He's the Achames. Shimon is the Yomi. Reuven was married to Shimon's daughter. When Reuven dies, so the Yevama falls the Yibum. But who's the Yevama? It's Shimon's own daughter. Shimon's not allowed to marry his daughter. She's an erva. That's what the Mishnah means. An erva, there's no Yibum. Now is there no Yibum, there's no Chalitza. Now is there no Chalitza. But even the other wife that's in the picture, even she's going to be excluded from Yibum V'chalitza. And if that other wife ever married another brother and there was another tzara, the tzara would also be excluded. Ubaspit. Another example would be if Reuven was married to Shimon's daughter's daughter, Ubaspinoi, or Reuven was married to Shimon's son's daughter, Bas Ishtoi. Reuven was married to Shimon's wife's daughter, Ubaspinoi. Reuven was married to Shimon's son's daughter, Ubaspita. Reuven was married to Shimon's daughter's daughter, Chamoisoi. Reuven was married to Shimon's mother-in-law. Reuven was married to Shimon's mother-in-law's mother. Or Reuven was married to Shimon's father-in-law's mother. Reuven was married to Shimon's sister, but his maternal sister. So Reuven and Shimon are paternal brothers. But Reuven is married to Shimon's maternal sister. He couldn't marry Shimon's paternal sister because that would be his sister, but he could marry Shimon's maternal sister because she's not even related to him. Or Reuven was married to Shimon's mother's sister. They had the same father, but they didn't have the same mother. And Reuven married his brother's mother's sister, which is something he's allowed to do. It's not a problem. It's not an error. Or Reuven was married to Shimon's wife's sister. Or Reuven was married to Shimon's brother from his mother's wife. Eishes Achiv Me'imai, meaning the Achiv Me'imai, it's that wife. The Eishes Achiv Shaloi Haya Bailamai. That's a whole nother sugya for a whole nother day. But what would be in the event that there were two brothers and the two brothers never knew each other? It says in the Torah, Ki Yeshvu Achim Yachdav, that the only time there's a mitzvah of Yibum is when there's two brothers and the two brothers are Yachdav. They're living together. So that's when you have a mitzvah of Yibum if one of them dies and leaves over no children. But in the event that the two brothers never knew each other, meaning the Yavam was born after his brother died, then there's no mitzvah of Yibum. As a result, that's an example of an erva that doesn't fall the Yibum. It's just the Kalasai, or if Reuven was married to Shimon's daughter-in-law. All these cases are feasible. Meaning we just listed not 15 arayas. What these 15 arayas have in common is where it's theoretically possible to have two brothers. One brother is married to this woman, and if he dies and the almana now falls the yibum, the almana is going to be an erva to the brothers that are alive. That's a lot. It's possible theoretically in all 15 of these cases. What's the halacha? Hari elu, poitros sareseim, v'tzares sareseim, and a chalitza v'nayiv matzayfayim. There's no Yibum v'chalitza, not by any one of these 15 arayas, not by their tzara, not by the tzara's tzara. And this goes atzoif koloi. What does atzoif koloi mean? It means tzara, right, etc., etc. Doesn't matter how many brothers you bring into the equation. If they die, they leave out with no children, and someone was a tzara to someone that was once a tzara of a tzara of a tzara, you can have the same exact halacha. They're going to be pater min achalitza min ayim. Zoktamish. What would be the kulon in Mesa? So what would be if Reuven again, same case, Reuven and Shimon are brothers. Reuven was married. He had 2 wives. The first wife, in no particular order, but one of the wives was an erva to Shimon. The other wife was not an erva to Shimon. So if Reuven would die, leave over no children, the halacha is there would be no yibum, even though ordinarily Yevamos yava yoleh. But in this case, there would be no yibum. And the reason there's no yibum is because an erva doesn't fall the yibum and a tzaris erva doesn't fall the yibum. What happens if the erva dies before Reuven dies? So Reuven is married to 2 wives. One of them is an erva. The erva died. And then after the erva died, Reuven died. Or what would happen if Reuven was married again to one of Shimon's relatives, to an erva, and to another wife. And before Reuven died, the erva did miyun. So what's miyun? Miyun is when a girl is married midrabanan. The halacha is if at any point she decides that she's not interested in being married anymore, she doesn't need a get. The halacha is she's allowed to just leave. She can refuse. That's what miyun means. And she could say, I'm not interested in being married anymore. Now, how could a woman be married midrabanan? So the classic case would be if there's a ketana, a girl that's very, very young. In the olden days, a ketana was considered to be vulnerable. So if she has a father, the father is going to protect her. But in the event that she's Yisayma, so she doesn't have a father to protect her, so Chazal made a takana and said that her relatives are allowed to marry her off. Like this, she'll have a husband. Like this, she's going to have someone to protect her. But the halach is that if at any point she decides she doesn't want the marriage, she's allowed to walk away from it. Doesn't she need to get? No, because the whole marriage is only midrabanan. And because it's midrabanan, she's allowed to leave. So again, what would happen if the erva, that's one of Reuven's 2 wives, dies? Or miyanu, did miyun, or niskarshu, or he divorced her, or shivim to islandess, or the halacha is that at some point during the marriage he found out that she's an islandess. An islandess is a woman that can't have children. There's a more technical definition to what an islandess is. But the halachic significance in our Mishna is that if someone's married to a woman and finds out that she's an islandess, if he wants, he's allowed to claim mekach tois and he's allowed to walk away from the marriage. So in all 4 of these cases, one thing happened. What happened is that the man is no longer married to the erva. So before Reuven died, his marriage to the erva was terminated, either because she died, or because she did miyun, or because she got divorced, or because she was nimtza islandess. And then he dies. What's the halacha? Sorry, say mutarais. At that point, the halacha is there's not going to be a din tzaras erva. Why? Because tzaras erva, here's the punchline of the Mishnah, is only if she was a tzaras erva at the time that Reuven died. If when Reuven died and left over no children, he left over 2 wives, an erva and a tzaras erva. Just like there's no yibum v'chalitza on the erva, there's also no yibum v'chalitza on the tzaras erva. But if Reuven was married to an erva before he died, but the marriage was terminated by the time he died, so at the time that he died, there was no erva anymore. So being that there was no erva anymore at the time that he died, so at that point, there's only the tzara. The tzara is not deemed to be a tzaras erva, and it's for that reason, tzara is saying mutaris, there's going to be no isser to go ahead and do. Now, this case is theoretically possible, meaning kulam in mesu and miyanu and niskarsho shemimtzu ailas by all 15 of the arayas that were mentioned in the Mishnah. Stating that, the Mishnah says it's actually not true. There are a few that it doesn't work. Regarding 3 of the 15 that we mentioned, if Reuven's married to Shimon's mother-in-law, or if Reuven's married to Shimon's mother-in-law's mother, or Shimon's father-in-law's mother. Those 3 cases, it's not possible that at some point during that marriage, she was nimtza islandess. He found out that she couldn't have any children, because at this point, she already has dairis. And or it's not possible that she would do miyun, because only a ketana could do miyun, and it can't be that she's the shviga's mother and she's a ketana. It just doesn't. It's not possible. So it's for that reason, Dr. Mishnah, that even though we're mentioning 15 arayos, these 15 arayos ordinarily are poitra, in the event that any one of the arayos were mesu mian and niskashed into island is mutaris, but we just have to qualify. We'll push it. We're literally crossing our T's and dotting our I's in the Mishnah. Just to be 100% clear, Dr. Mishnah, 3 of the 15 cases that we said, don't work for two of these four exclusions. For the case of Mianu and from the case of Nimtzu Islands, it doesn't play out with Chamoisai, Eim Chamoisai, and Eim Chamoy. Either way, that's the halacha of the Mishnah. So the halacha of the Mishnah is pretty straightforward. Mishnah says that there's Chavesh Esrei Nashim that are Poitras Sarisayim, but Sarisayim, and Chalitzim, and Ayivim, and Atzoif, Ha'olam. In other words, the halacha of erva being patim and even mechalitza, tsaras erva being patim and even mechalitza, and tsaras tzara being patim and even mechalitza. And then the Mishnah said that that's only going to be an issue, meaning the only time the erva is going to effectuate, it's going to impact the tzara, is if they were erva and tsaras erva at the time that Reuven died. But if they weren't erva and tsaras erva at the time they died, but rather prior to Reuven's death, the marriage had been terminated. How so? Either through death, or through miyun, or through gerushin, or shenimtzu islanders, then these halachas won't be true, because then the tzara will not have a din of a tzaras there. So the first part of the Mishnah mentions the halacha. The second part of the Mishnah is just going to speak out ketzah, just some cases of how this halacha plays out. Nothing that we haven't said already. What's an example of erva patering the tsaras erva? What would be if Shimon's daughter or one of the other arayas were married to Reuven? And Reuven had another wife, and then Reuven died. Just like the daughter is pater, there's no chalitza on an erva. So too, there's going to be no yibum, there's going to be no chalitza on the tzara either. And this is the achad hasheni. What happens if when Reuven died, he left over not one brother, two brothers. He left over a brother Shimon and he left over a brother Levi. Now, Shimon couldn't do yibum. Why? Because one of Reuven's wives was an erva and the other one was a tzaras erva. As a result, there was no ability to do yibum. However, Levi was able to do yibum because although Reuven's wife was an erva to Shimon, but Reuven's wife was not an erva to Levi. So if Reuven's wife was not an erva to Levi, Reuven's other's wife was not a tsaras erva to Levi, so Levi was able to do whatever he wants. So what happens after Mishnah, after Reuven died, if the Sarah went and married the Achasheni, married Levi, and Levi had another wife, Umeis, and then Levi died. So when Levi died, Levi's two wives fell to Shimon. Who are Levi's two wives? The original tsaras erva of Reuven, and now Levi's second wife. So the Mishnah, tsaras bitay petura, just like there's going to be no yibam v'chalitza on the original tsaras erva, kach tsaras sarasa petura. So too, Levi's other wife, the tsaras is going to be the same way. And afilu meya, this case can repeat itself 100 times. The halacha is always going to be the same. Once someone is either an erva or a tsaras erva, or the tzara of a tzaras erva, or the tzara of the tzara of a tzaras erva. Its tzara is always going to be pater min hayibum v'chalitza. So that's the ketzah for the first part of the Mishnah. What's the ketzah for the second part of the Mishnah? Ketzah, what's the case of a mesu tzaresei mutares? Right, the Mishnah said that in the event that the erva died, before Reuven died, then the tzara is going to be mutter. What's that case? What would be if Shimon's daughter or one of the other arayas were married to Reuven, and Reuven had another wife? Then the halacha is mesa bita or if Shimon's daughter died or Shimon's daughter was divorced from Reuven, and then afterwards Reuven died, tzarasa muteres. In that case, the halacha is going to be that the tzara is going to be mutter, because like we said, the only time a woman's considered a tzaras erva is if she was a tzaras erva at the time that Reuven died. But if she wasn't a tzaras erva at the time that Reuven died, in that instance, she's not going to be considered a tzaras erva. And the Mishnah concludes with one last halacha. Anytime a person is married to a woman midrabanan, and specifically in our case, if Reuven was married to Shimon's erva, but he was married to Shimon's erva midrabanan, the erva was a ketana, and it was a marriage that was effectuated by one of her relatives, where if she decides at some point she's not interested in the marriage, that's something that she has a right to do. So she's married midrabanan, but she's only married midrabanan. So what would be then if Reuven dies? And now Reuven's two wives fall the yibum, the erva and the quote-unquote zaras erva. But in this case, the erva is not an erva midiraisa. The erva is only an erva midrabanan. And the reason the erva is only an erva midrabanan is because the whole marriage between Reuven and this woman is only a marriage midrabanan. Right? Again, it's the same exact case, this last line. It's a case where Reuven is married to one of Shimon's Arayas. However, he's not married to Midei Raisa. He's only married to Midei Rabbanon. So now when Reuven dies, so Reuven leaves over two Yevamos. One is an erva, albeit Midei Rabbanon, and the other one is a tzaras erva Midei Rabbanon, but a regular Yevama Midei Raisa. So over here, to just simply dismiss this whole case and say, oh, she's a tzaras erva, no yibum, no chalitza, chas v'shalom. Because Midei Raisa, she's not a tzaras erva. Midei Rabbanon, she's a tzaras erva. Midei Raisa, she's not a tzaras erva. So what would we do? Right? How would a dayan paskin such a shayla? To say she's a tzaras erva, the tzara, you can't say that because Midei Rabbanon, she's not a tzaras erva. Go ahead. I mean, Midei Raisa, she's not a tzaras erva. To say do yibum, you can't do either. Why not? Because Midei Rabbanon, she is a tzaras erva. So what do you do when you have a yibum situation, but you can't do yibum? So this is the first of many times that we're going to see this. After Mishna Chaylet says, that's always the way out. Meaning just do chalitz and don't do yibum. Don't do yibum because you're violating the Issa Tzaras Erva Midrabanan. Because Midrabanan, she's a Tzaras Erva. You can't do nothing because Midei Raisa, she's stuck. She'll be in Aguna. This Yevama needs something to unlock her Zika in order for her to be able to get married. So you're going to definitely have to do something. So to do nothing is not an option. To do Yibum is not an option. So what do you do whenever you have a situation like this? You always do Chalitza, that's the halacha. So in summary, what was the first Mishnah? What's the first daf of Meseches Yevamos? It's the halacha of Erva and Saras Erva. That's the halacha. Ordinarily, if there's two brothers, one of them dies and leaves over no children, so the halacha is Yevama Yava Yalel L'Kochalei L'Isha V'Yibum. There's a mitzvah to do Yibum. And if you don't want to do Yibum, so the option B is you always go ahead and do Chalitza. But there are times where Chiyech V'Achim Yachtav Umeis Achad Nehem Ubein Einloi, and there will not be a mitzvah of Yibum, and there will not be a mitzvah of Chalitza. What's an example? The primary example is an erva. In the event that Reuven was married to one of Shimon's relatives, and even though Reuven and Shimon are brothers, like we spoke out unnecessarily, it's still possible for Reuven to be married to one of Shimon's relatives. So the bottom line is, in the event that Reuven is married to one of Shimon's relatives, and then he dies, so that relative, being that she's an erva, assuming she's an erva, Shimon's not let her marry. And even though there's a mitzvah Yibum, it doesn't matter. Yibum is not toicha the Isser erva. Yibum is not toich the Isser erva. So the halach is that he would not be able to go ahead and marry her. There's no Yibum. Now is there no Yibum, there's no Chalitza. Not only is there no Yibum and no Chalitza, but even if Reuven had another wife, that other wife is a regular Shesach. That is not an erva. Doesn't matter. There's a Gzeres HaKosav. We'll learn the Makar to it tomorrow of Tzaras Erva. And the halach is that a Tzaras Erva is also not okay. You're not allowed to marry a Tzaras Erva. And even if that Tzaras Erva would then marry another one of the brothers, and then she would follow Yibum, her Tzara would also be a Tzara. Not a Tzaras Erva, but a Tzaras Erva. It's the same kind. Sounds a little trickier, but it's the same exact concept. That is the halach of the first Mishnah. But just to end the first daf with one Dvar Machshava, and that is that we know the Zohar HaKadosh says, it's in Parshas Kiseitze, it says that Mashiach is going to reveal himself as an Ani that's Roichav al Chamar. He's going to reveal himself as an Ani, as an Oraman that's Roichav al Chamar, that's riding on a donkey. And the Zohar HaKadosh says that the word Ani is Rashi Tevis, Erevin, Nida, and Yevamos. And the Sfarim say that what the Zohar HaKadosh is saying is that when a person learns Erevin, and when a person learns Nida, and when a person learns Yevamos, it's befrat, it's been yuchad mesugel for Mashiach to come. Ani v'roichav al chamar. Ani, Erev and Nida Yevamos is going to bring the Ani. It's going to bring Mashiach Tzidkenu. That's what's going to cause the Geula to come. And the Welt says that why these three Mesechtes? What is it about Erevin? What is it about Nida? What is it about Yevamos? So it's Margul B'Puma de Inshi that these are the three hardest Mesechtes in Shas. That the three hardest Mesechtes are Erevin, Nida, and Yevamos. Definitely all three in the conversation. That goes without doubt. But the point is that because they're so hard and it causes us to hurry more and to think more and to really invest more and to apply ourselves more. So for that reason, in the schus of the limit HaTorah and the Amelus HaTorah, that's what's going to bring Mashiach. I just had one hergish preparing the daf, and that is that we mentioned a long time ago in the introduction to today's daf, that the Ramban says in his Pirush Al Torah in Parshas Vayeshev that there are two places in Torah Shabbat that we find that there was a Yibum. We find Yibum by Yehuda and Tamar, and we find Yibum by Bus and by Boaz and Rus. And I was thinking, what do Yehuda and Tamar and Boaz and Rus have in common? Mashiach. Mashiach came from Yehuda and Tamar. Mashiach came from Boaz and Rus. And the truth is, if you think about it for a second, it's a pella. Mashiach is going to come from Yehuda and Tamar, from such a union, Mashiach's going to come from Boaz and Rus. That's Yidua that the Svarim say, that the Gemara says in Perek Chelek, Im ben David ba el mitoich chesed chadas, that Mashiach's going to come mitoich chesed chadas. Pasha, what it means is that when we're least expecting Mashiach to arrive, all of a sudden, Pisayim Yavai, that's when Mashiach's going to arrive, and that's when he's going to come. When we least expect it, that's when it's going to happen. But the Svarim HaKadoshim say that Im ben David ba el mitoich chesed chadas, that being that Mashiach is so critical, it's so important for Klal Yisrael, so the Samach Men and the Mekatrigim, they're working overtime. They're trying to do whatever they can possibly do to make sure that Mashiach is not going to come. So simply to go ahead and to confuse the Satan, the Eibishter felt the only way Mashiach can come is from an instance, from a scenario where you would least expect it to come from. And you know what that is? It's through a zivug from Arayos. Yehudim Tamar, who was a father-in-law and a daughter-in-law. Even Boaz and Rus, that was also a situation where they were relatives. Now there was Yibum, and because there's Yibum, there's a heter Shazach, and Koydam Torah, there was a heter on the other Arayos as well. Like the Ramban says that this is from the greatest Soid Gadol Misoidus Atayr B'Toiledes Adam. But at the end of the day, it's the least place you would ever expect it to come from, and it's Dafka that Hesach Hadas that Mashiach comes from. Mashiach comes with Hesach Hadas. That's why he came through Yibum. But the bottom line is that the two Yibums that we have in the Torah brought Mashiach. Mashiach came from Yevamos. That's where he came from. There is a very deep, intricate bond between Yevamos and Mashiach. Mashiach's going to come, says the Zohar, from Ani, from Erevin, Nida, and Yevamos, the Shver Meseches. But when you learn Yevamos, there's also maybe an element of Unashalma Parms Faseino. We're learning Yevamos. Yevamos is going to bring Mashiach. The Gemara says Mashiach is going to come right after a Shemitah year. Right? It says during a Shemitah year, there's going to be wars, and then Mashiach's going to come. Maybe we're living taka in a world where the simanim of Mashiach, which is taka dizoicha, the schus of Klal Yisrael, hundreds of thousands of Yidden throughout the world taking it upon themselves, the oil, and willing to dig a little bit deeper to learn Meseches Yevamos, taka mitaycha melos. That's schus. We should all be zoicha to be a skayel tzedek, b'mheira b'yameinu amen.